Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of V Next. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the future of work and what it means to all of us in the wake of this global pandemic. And so, like many of us out there that are struggling with uh, remote work and coordinating family, um, not having access to resources that we had in the office, this can be fairly daunting. And so, in this episode, what we want to talk about is what are some of the key trends and observations that I'm seeing out with my clients around the world. And so, you may have seen a previous webcast where I was on a Ohio X webcast where we talked about the future of remote work. So, in this episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that I had mentioned on that webinar, but I'm going to expand upon that a bit more here for all of you. Now, the difficulty with a lot of this is that we're not just dealing with one pandemic. We're actually dealing with the coalescing of four pandemics. We're facing a health crisis. We're facing an economic crisis. We're facing a social crisis and a geopolitical crisis. And they're all coming to a head right now. And so when we look at what is going on and the future of how we're going to work, all these issues are coalescing. And, while it is extremely unfortunate, it's unfortunately kind of where we're at. So it's not as easy as looking back to 1918 at the Spanish flu and see what we did then, because we weren't necessarily dealing with the Great Depression that happened, 10 years later. Um, Different effects, likewise reflecting back to the 2008 financial collapse as well. It's tough to figure out how we're going to navigate this. All swirling here with not only these trends, but also the technical disruption that's happening right now. We've got startups and all this great emerging tech that is actively disrupting our businesses, and now this pandemic is creating all sorts of new opportunities for these companies that choose to embrace those technologies. Now, like I said, I want to talk a bit about, you know, our day to day lives and what this looks like going forward. And, I've compiled a few trends, a few observations on kind of how I see, at least based on the information that I have right now, how this is playing out. And so, kind of the first observation here that I'm seeing is that this whole trend of working virtually, it's here to stay. Um, Most of the clients that I talk to, even my colleagues that I talk to, talk about how while it was somewhat disruptive at first, and there is some unfortunate consequences with kids being at home and all that, but in general, people are liking it. Um, and there was an interesting survey done by, I believe it was buffer.com, where of the interviewees, 99% of them said, hey, I want a work from home option for me. And so that's a big deal. When we look at, the kids coming out of college, almost 30% of them would rather work from home. Again, this is a lot of people. Now, there were some interesting surveys that were done as well in China here over the past few months. This one was done by Bloom, and they reported of the employees that were in the office versus the employees that were at home. They were significantly more productive. 13% more productive than being in the office. I'd have to say that for me, I've been a remote worker for the past, decade or more, and uh, you do get used to this sort of mode. You get used to not dealing with driving to work, and having all that time that isn't very productive. Yes, you can listen to great podcasts like this one. You can jam out on your way to work, or hop on a conference call. But by and large, there's a lot of wasted time, going to work, finding a parking spot, getting into the office, getting settled in, water cooler talk, finding a place for lunch. All that just eats away at your productivity. Now, like I said on a previous webinar, I don't think that, we should necessarily say that this is an all or nothing thing. And that's kind of where I'll get into another trend that I think will be prevalent. But, I do think that people are realizing that there's a lot of efficiencies working remotely, even though, there are some initial kind of set up things that you're going to have to do. I mean, I've got my own workspace here, my own office. And the only reason why I do is because I've been working virtually for so long and it just made sense. Now, another aspect is from a remote work perspective, both companies and the employees are going to save a ton of money. Uh, do with some estimates, they're saying anywhere from 2,000 to $7,000 uh, a year that employees will save on gas driving to work, um, parking lot fees. If you are working in an urban area, you're going to have to deal with that. Clothing, there's just investment that will need to be made there. Food, it's kind of a pain to pack your lunch every day. Working from home, your lunch is right upstairs in your fridge or what have you. But people are saving a ton of money by not eating out a ton. And also childcare. Being home affords you some flexibility that you wouldn't have in the past. So I think that's the first major trend that I'm seeing, is that people are really grokking this whole idea of working virtually at least part of the time. And that gets me to kind of the second big observation, which is this hybrid mode. I think this is really going to be the prevalent mode of work, where we're going to optimize how we work based on what environment is best for productivity. So if I'm trying to crank out a proposal for a client, I want some good quiet desk time. Uh, if I want to have an ideation workshop where I'm trying to help a client figure out what's the next big innovation idea, while I could do that virtually and be somewhat successful, you know, it's probably better that I'm in person. And so the amount of times in which I'm doing that is going to be fairly small portion of my time. um, Now, this is an outbound type of thing with clients, but if you're like going into the office, maybe there's, collaboration sessions that you schedule. Maybe that there is, special social events that we want to focus more on. I think, personally, based on what I'm seeing, is I think that employee collaboration will actually increase in this mode. And I'll give you an example. So, I work for Microsoft and I don't live in Seattle, where most of my key stakeholders reside. They're at headquarters, they're in Redmond, Washington. Now, now this is pre pandemic. When I would fly to Seattle every month, I would find that that 3 to 4 days was super, super productive. Even though I spent the majority of the time away, I was able to optimize my time there. And it created an environment that was super, super productive. I got a lot out of it. I think that the people participating got a lot out of it, but it just forces a set of behaviors. And, when I think about some of the observations that I'm making with other clients, I think people are realizing the same thing that uh, w- we don't all have to be in the office. Yes, collaboration is important, but there's different types of collaboration, and we need to make sure that that collaboration is the right collaboration for the right problems that we're solving. So that's a second key observation or trend that I'm seeing. The third is, uh, if I harness my inner Skywalker, there is a disturbance in the work life balance. Um, we talked about a couple positive aspects here. Some of the negatives is that we're seeing people work m- longer hours. um, the blurring of the private life and the professional life are melding together, and I think a lot of this has to do with people aren't used to this remote work scenario, and it's just this period of adapting. I know that that over the past decade that I've been working remotely, I've been able to kind of figure out my groove on how I wanted to organize my day and all that. But now, when everyone's at home, uh, I find that I've been working more than I ever have remotely, and a lot of other people do as well. So whether it's trying to prove that they're not playing Xbox all day long, or it's that they are just wildly more productive, um, one of these two cases are probably true. Um, Now, some of the things that, as techniques to mitigate some of this, that at least that I've employed, have been to, in a very similar context as the hybrid work environment, but also here when we talk about meetings, is compressing meetings. And so instead of having, a longer meeting, maybe play with, hey, can we get this done in 15 minutes? Can we get this done in 30 minutes? um, trying different techniques there. But we'll get into more of that here in a little bit. The fourth key trend is, while there is a ton of upside, a ton of benefit to remote meetings, and there are definitely some increased collaboration aspects to remote meetings, uh, there are some downsides. And I think one of the biggest downsides is uh, this virtual meeting fatigue that is starting to occur. And, I can relate to that because, even pre pandemic, you just feel mentally exhausted after the end of a day, because, you're interacting with people in a very unnatural way when you're doing it over a webcam. You're staring at this little green dot because you want to make sure that the people, at the other end think that you're actually looking at them and not down, at the floor or up at the ceiling, however your computer is situated. And so just constantly readjusting and positioning and saying, yes, okay, I'm looking at you. Okay. Um, that's tough. And, it's a concentration thing. And so I think that that causes a significant amount of fatigue, and it's challenging. Um, Now, another aspect is as far as the nonverbals. So when we talk about communication, a lot of our communication is actually nonverbal conversation. So the actual words that I say, if I just type them out, um, only convey a certain amount of the communication. The tone of my voice, the inflections that I make, the gestures that I'm making, my facial expressions, all these things combined are essentially is the communication. And likewise, if you see here as we're recording this, you'll notice that a lot of my torso is showing. The reason for that is I want to be able to show the movement of my hands and arms that is trying to convey some of these key messages. And so that's really important. So, I would suggest, when you turn on the webcam and you have some of these remote meetings, definitely think about where that camera is positioned. If you've got it on the desk, maybe get a few books and elevate your laptop or your webcam, and so that you're not physically trying to move your head around all the time to try to adjust to where the camera is. But also make sure that you're showing a good portion of your torso as well, to be able to show the movement of your arms, to show that you are engaged in the type of communication uh, that you want to convey. Another aspect, and these are kind of some random aspects that I've observed, is there's the either whatever virtual solution you're using, whether it's uh, Microsoft Teams, whether it's WebEx, whether it's Zoom. um, we kind of get into this Brady Bunch issue of making sure that we're always paying attention, and making sure that I'm not making a silly gesture or what have you, because everyone can still see my video. Um, I think that there's still a lot to that we need to kind of work through, and what is the proper etiquette, and some of the etiquette that is kind of built out that I've prescribed to and have adopted is, um, where there is a need to show the video, I'll keep it on. But where there's times where the video doesn't really matter that it's on, I'll turn it off unless I'm speaking. So if I'm going to speak, I'll flip on the video. And so that acts as a cue also for whoever's facilitating that meeting, um, to be able to say, okay, well, we've got three or four people. Mike wants to say something, his video flipped on. And so it's a real easy way to alert people that you want to communicate something as well. Another aspect is, and I actually heard this morning, was the just the anxiety around bandwidth, and do I have enough bandwidth to be able to stream video? I can't believe I'm saying this in 2020, um, but uh, our infrastructure isn't supporting some basic telecommunications here. I was just on a call earlier today where the audio was just, I mean, not even the video, but the audio was all out of whack. And you heard kind of the old school squeaky internet sounding echoey voice coming across the line. And so whether that's happening or just the anxiety of, if you've had problems with that before. I know that I've had problems either with my client app or my desktop or the bandwidth itself, and that's a lot of stress, especially if you're going to present to maybe your boss or your boss's boss, some big important meeting, or maybe to a client. Uh, that's a significant amount of stress, that we were still, again, working through. How do you deal with that? What is acceptable, what isn't acceptable? And kind of the last observation, so I like to keep these fairly crisp, so I'm going to give you five key trends and observations that I'm seeing. um, and the fifth is really centered around, remote workers are really much more productive than in person, in the office workers. And I've mentioned that in various different aspects, as we've talked about some of these other trends. But you know, Stanford, they just released a survey. They said that remote workers are 13% more productive, very similar to the Chinese study as well. Um, and the reason why is, again, you're getting rid of all these major time suckers out of your day, and we're able to concentrate on the things that we need to get done. And I don't have to tell all of you that I'm sure that a lot of you have observed a very, very similar effect. Now, with all this, um, what do we do? These are some of the observations out there and some of the trends. But what are some of the key techniques to adjust to this new normal? If the new normal is going to be, we're going to be remote at least some of the time. What does that look like? And again, for this episode, I don't want to focus on the broader trends. I'm actually going to have another episode where we talk about the effects of the global pandemic and what that means from a technology trend perspective. So we're going to get into more of that later. But for this episode, it's more about kind of our routine. How does our work environment change based on everything that's going on around us? So some recommendations that I'd have for all of you to think about is establish a routine. So just like when you would go into the office, uh, do the same thing remotely. And so what I do is very similar to if I had to go into an office. From starting the day with either exercise or meditation, hop in the shower, get dressed for the day, and clothes that would be what you would wear to work, possibly. So maybe it's a business casual type of look, or you throw in a polo, something that looks presentable, but you get in work mode. And I found that the clothing that we wear not only communicates a message. Again, it's a lot of these nonverbals in our messaging, and we've all read the articles. Dress for the job that you want. Very similar here as well. When you're applied to yourself, you wear work clothes, and you're kind of in work mode. You wear casual clothes or your Birkenstocks and your cut off shorts or whatever you're doing, um, then you're going to be in play mode. And so, definitely establish a routine, and you know fit the mold of, hey, I'm going to work. Now, part of that, kind of my second recommendation as part of that would be have a dedicated space where that's your work environment. I can tell you that even though I have an office, I haven't always had an office. When I haven't, it was always about carving off a space where I know that's where I'm going to get work done. And again, it's this kind of back of your mind psychological thing that just by having that dedicated space, you're there to work. Another aspect that I would recommend for folks to really think about is insert a little humor into the day. um don't take yourself too seriously. um you know do something fun with your team. If you're remote, there's lots of different things that you can do, but just to break up the monotony of the day, because as human beings we still crave that interaction with people. And so it's important that you don't take yourself too seriously. You um, have fun, and really enjoy the people that you're working with, even if it is virtually. Now, my third recommendation for you guys to think about, and I've learned this the hard way over the years, is that when you're working remotely, the meeting that you're going to go to, uh, the meeting itself, and maybe the presentation you're gonna make or something that you build, what have you, um, that's one thing. But really, the challenge when you're remote is prep. And so making sure that you've got all the preparation work to conduct, maybe let's say you're running a workshop. Um, what are all the prerequisites to the workshop? If you can't have people in a room where you can adjust on the fly, how do you prepare for that? Establishing some ground rules on how you'll handle different things is critically important for you to get your arms around. So definitely make sure that you build prep into everything that you're doing. Now, also when we're talking about remote meetings, a recommendation that I would have here, and we kind of alluded to this, is about the um 55 38 7 formula, around 55 percent of the communication is actually body language, 38% is tone of voice, and 7% is actually the specific words. And so making sure that whenever you are communicating, that you keep that in the back of your head and you plan for that. So if you're going to maybe you say, hey, I'm just going to write an email. Maybe it's more effective if you just hop on a quick call, or do a quick video chat. But also be aware of all this fatigue that is happening around all these virtual meetings. Kind of how I've broken up the monotony a little bit is I've gone on walks and I'll have my phone and I will have my Microsoft Teams meeting open, and I'll take a walk with a colleague and hold my phone up, have my earbuds in, and we'll be having a meeting as I'm walking down the road. I'm getting some sunshine, getting a little exercise, but also breaking up that monotony of staring at a camera, my laptop webcam. And when you're in that environment, also the expectation isn't that I'm going to hold the phone up to my face and do this. The expectation is I'm probably going to see this person's inner nostrils, or they're going to flip the camera around, or there's going to be a social contract in place that it's, yes, this person is walking down the road or on a trail, and this isn't going to be a professional, I'm looking at you type of setting. So be aware of all that virtual fatigue that is occurring with virtual meetings. Right size the type of interaction based on what you want to get out of it, what you want to communicate. And so, in these times where we are remote and we don't have the luxury of walking down the hall and taking advantage of that, 55% physical communication, we've got to figure out ways to mitigate that when we're remote. And so I think, given, where things are heading, I think there's a lot more observations. I think that we're going to start to see additional challenges start to emerge as a result. I've just scratched the surface, but I wanted to release an episode where I talk about this a little bit because I've been asked about this a ton. People know that I've worked remotely for a long time, and they're like, Mike, how do you deal with this? I'm going crazy. I've got these issues. I don't maybe even know what the issue is. I just am kind of feeling the pain. I'm like super stressed, super fatigued. I'm working more hours than I know what to do with. And so, hopefully this has been helpful for all of you. We're going to do, pepper in some of these types of style episodes where I talk through specific topics myself, based on what I'm seeing in the marketplace. So hopefully, again, this has been useful, and we'll see you in the next one.